The Lone Ranger. This film is this year's John Carter, in as much as it's a massive blockbuster movie put out by Disney and is also one of the biggest flops of the year, if not the biggest flop of the year. This is a film that was just savaged by critics, and also a lot of people didn't have the opportunity to see. Now, before I go into my review of the film, I just wanted to say, and I've mentioned this briefly in a previous video, I wanted to see this based on the trailer. Look, here's the Blu-ray that was bought for me for Christmas. I wanted to see this film when I saw the trailer. It was out on the Friday, or the previews on the Thursday, so, you know, like every other movie is. I thought, right, we'll go see that the following Wednesday when it's 2 for 1. By the time Wednesday came around, it wasn't on anymore. And I know that that doesn't just apply to me, because I've asked a couple of friends and it happened to them as well. The Lone Ranger was on for less than a week where we are, and we didn't have the opportunity to see it. Does that mean it was manufactured or sabotaged in order to make it a flop? You decide. But the point is, I wanted to see this, didn't get the chance at the cinema, saw it on Blu-ray. Now, it's one of the most hated movies of the year, from what I can tell, looking briefly at like posts on IMDb and Amazon and stuff. There are a lot of people sort of defending it, but there seems to be sort of a lot of hatred for this movie. Now, what I thought of it, I watched it last night, I've been digesting it since. I absolutely loved this film. It's not often that you watch a film where it's just, it makes you feel like a kid again, right? So basically, let's get into the plot to begin with. You have Armie Hammer, who plays the Lone Ranger here, is deputised as a Texas Ranger, John Reid, who, the plot's fairly sort of convoluted, but he's basically, in an ambush, is supposedly killed and awoken by Tonto, played by Johnny Depp. And they go on a mission to basically stop the bad guys from their evil schemes. The main bad guy is played by William Fichtner, who was in The Dark Knight and Contact and a load of other stuff, Prison Break. He plays Butch Cavendish, who is a cannibal, sort of serial murderer. So that's basically at the heart of the film. It's a revenge story. John Reid wants to capture Cavendish and bring him to justice using the law. He's very much a straight-laced, by-the-book type of guy, whereas Tonto wants to murder him and has his own reasons for it. It becomes apparent that Tonto's also been hunting Cavendish for the last 27 years, before John Reid sort of encountered him. That's the very basic plot, because the film's scope widens over the course of the film and it becomes a lot more about like land and railroads and stuff, and it very much takes the Leone sort of school of thought, in that it's heart, it's a you know, a small story about revenge and the wanting justice, but it has a wider context. So I don't want to go into all that and spoil it, but it is a big movie in terms of overall sort of plot and context. Now, a lot of people have criticised this film, I think, before it even came out, because Johnny Depp was cast as Tonto rather than having a Native American actor play Tonto, who is a Native American. I didn't have a problem with that at all. If anything, Johnny Depp was really good in this. He's always really good. He sort of does that whole deadpan, borderline slapstick, comedy, physical comedy aspect. He's great in this. It's not just a carbon copy of Jack Sparrow, because with Tonto, and not to give too much away, it's basically established that his head's gone. You know, he's round the twist, and Johnny Depp plays it with a certain amount of sort of layering to his character, so he's not just a sidekick. Well, actually, that's another thing I wanted to address. So Johnny Depp gives Tonto, you know, a lot of layers as a character, and a lot of people have sort of criticised the movie as well, because Tonto takes top billing over the Lone Ranger himself, and the Armie Hammer is sidelined in his own movie. I didn't find that to be the case. There is no sidekick in this film, whereas I think the traditional perspective of the Lone Ranger is that the Lone Ranger is the main character and Tonto is his sidekick. Neither of them are the sidekick in this. I felt that the film and their backstories their own arcs were pretty evenly spread. You know, neither of them sort of took the limelight away from the other, and I can live with that. I thought that was a far more interesting dynamic than if one of them had been the sidekick, regardless of which one it was. So I didn't have a problem with that. I thought it was fairly even, and don't really understand those criticisms. Armie Hammer as the Lone Ranger. Going in, you know, I'd heard people criticise the fact that, oh, he's like a wet lettuce and has no personality and all the rest of it. That couldn't be further from the truth. Armie Hammer is really good in this. The only other thing I've seen him in, which I actually liked him in, was The Social Network. He managed to play, you know, the sort of bully character, almost like a bully character, but wasn't really. And make him likeable in The Social Network because he had been wronged, and he brought a lot to that role, and I thought, you know, this guy's actually pretty good. So going into The Lone Ranger, I was like, well, I'm open to seeing, you know, what this guy can do when he's given his own film. And I thought he was pretty great in this. He brings enough to the role. He is the straight-laced character, so inherently he's not given as many quirks or things like that that are probably going to stay with people when they leave the film, like stay with the average audience, but he has fantastic comic timing. I mean, this has belly laughs in it. I laughed probably, you know, a handful of times during the course of this movie. It has some belly laughs in there. It's due in no small part to his comic timing. He's, I thought, pretty good in this. I mean, don't get me wrong, you know, Johnny Depp does tend to steal every scene he's in, but Armie Hammer can hold his own. So those criticisms to say that Armie Hammer, you know, might as well have not been in the film, I don't agree with those either. I thought he was really good in this. William Fichtner's great as Butch Cavendish. He plays it with such sort of evil verve that you can't help but, like, stare at the screen when he's on it. He's pretty great in this, and it is very much helped by the fact that Gore Verbinski, the director, who also did Mouse Hunt, The Ring, Pirates of the Caribbean, the first three, he basically shoots the film like an epic, and it is an epic. It has a massive budget, but every cent is on screen. He shoots the film like, you know, big landscapes, like in a John Ford movie, and there are plenty of John Ford references, there are plenty of Sergio Leone references, but this is certainly the Wild West where you can feel the dirt under your fingernails. I honestly forgot I was watching a Disney film that's rated 12 while I was watching this, and that brings me on to another aspect of the film, that this film is tonally inconsistent. I have to admit, it is tonally inconsistent. It goes from belly laughs and you know, light-hearted sort of rip-roaring set pieces to a shot of William Fichtner eating somebody's heart after he's cut it out of the chest. And it's just like, whoa, where did that come from? So, tonally, it's a bit all over the place. But then I thought, well, there are movies like this that, you know, a lot of people really like that were similarly all over the place. I mean, look at Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Now, I'm not saying that this is as good as that, but, you know, people criticise this for, you know, going from really light to really dark very shortly. You know, Indiana Jones did that 30 years ago, or however long it was. So, I do see how that could make people uncomfortable. I can imagine, you know, if you took a kid to see this, you might not be best pleased at some of the violence in it. I honestly think this probably stretches what you can get away with in a PG-13 or a 12 certificate. Actually, it's probably right at the brink of becoming a 15, in this country at least. But I love that because, I love the fact that kids' movies can be dark. You know, kids don't need to be patronised. Kids, if anything, can tolerate a lot more than adults can because they're much less cynical. You know, the bad guys, you know, the baddies have to be bad and the goodies have to be good. And, you know, if that means that the film has inherently dark elements, then, you know, go for it. I didn't really bother me at all. The film, if anything, it is a bit probably too long. It's 2.5 hours. The first and third acts are definitely the strongest. They contain, you know, the big action set pieces. The second act sort of lays on thick the backstories and the exposition. And at no point was I bored. I will say that. At no point was I bored, but I can definitely feel a sag in the middle of the movie. And I think that's, you know, another criticism that people have of it. But I didn't feel it to the extent where, you know, people said, oh, it ruined the movie. It was like, it felt like it was 5 hours long. That I didn't feel like that at all. I was never bored. I enjoyed every minute of it, but I can definitely see how it sags in the middle. So if anything, you could probably go in there and shave 15-20 minutes off, and straight away something you could lose would be Helena Bonham Carter's character, who you see in the trailer, who was, you know, involved in the marketing campaign. Her character might as well not be in it. I think she's in 2 or 3 scenes. She might as well not be in there. She doesn't do anything. She isn't given anything to do, in fairness, but she seems to be in there for little more than a cameo. So there is stuff that you could take out of the movie, and maybe it would help improve the pacing slightly. But again, it wasn't that much of an issue for me, but I could definitely see, you know, considering the film had such a massive budget, I can see, well, you've paid Helena Bonham Carter's fees for her to be in this, and she might as well not be there. So that was a minor criticism. The film itself, though, is probably the most fun I've had watching like a big blockbuster in a long time. There's enough in there. I mean, this is the sort of film that I would have lapped up as a kid. And to be honest, I did lap it up. I enjoyed every minute. But as a child, if I'd watched this, I would have absolutely loved it. And honestly, in the last action set piece, which involves 2 trains, you get glimpses of it in the trailer. As soon as the Lone Ranger theme tune kicks in, I felt like a kid again. I really enjoyed this film. So objectively looking at it, the action scenes are really well done. There is a lot of CGI, in as much as I think a lot of like shots of herds of animals or groups of animals are CG. But from what I could tell, a lot of the action was practical. A lot of the train stuff was practical. The CG as well, when the CG does come in, it's some of the best CG I've seen. And that's obviously due to the massive budget that this film had. But the CG is pretty great, but they mix it in with practical effects, and that's how a film should be. CG is just another tool in a filmmaker's arsenal. It shouldn't be relied upon. There's a lot of stunt work, a lot of practical effects. The action scenes are shot so you can actually tell what's happening, because there has been a lot of blockbusters recently that the action hasn't been particularly well directed. But this film, you know, you could tell what was happening. There was a reason for the action scenes, although, you know, they do become borderline cartoonish, but I quite liked that, because again, that's like throwing back to earlier kids' movies, and the action scenes are sort of overblown, but they remain grounded in as much as the use of practical effects help them feel real, you know, even as they become more cartoonish. So I love the way that the action scenes were directed. I honestly think that Gore Verbinski is an underrated director. You know, this guy, he did Mouse Hunt, which is a fantastic comedy. He did The Ring, which I prefer to any of the other versions of that story. Pirates of the Caribbean, the first one, is a great swashbuckling adventure movie. The sequels, crap. This is a great film. Rango was a great animated film. Gore Verbinski is a very talented director, and I think he gets the sort of rubbish end of the stick because of the Pirates movies. I think that people are ready to dismiss his new films because of the Pirates sequels, which is unfortunate. This film, I mean, it's not going to be for everyone, but if you grew up in a certain time, if you grew up in the 80s or 90s, watching, you know, Hollywood blockbusters, and, you know, you like your swashbuckling adventure films or Boy's Own Hero sort of thing, you're going to like this movie. It's not fair that it received the reception that it did. It's a lot of fun. It's one of the most fun movies of the year. I have to say, it made me feel like a kid again. I loved every minute of it, and all the acting in this was great. The set pieces were great. The pacing does sag in the middle, and there's a couple of unnecessary minor characters, but name me a blockbuster that doesn't have that, you know. Don't get me wrong, it's not a perfect film. It's, you know, not one of the best films. Is it one of my favourites that I've seen this year so far? Quite possibly. I really enjoyed this movie and really recommend it to those of you who will go in with an open mind and enjoy it for what it is, a throwback to Spielbergian blockbusters of the 80s. Go check it out, because I really enjoyed it and just can't recommend it enough.